Week 10 of the PhD. Literature review continues the pace. Man, keeping up the pace on this is challenging. I just keep finding more studies that could theoretically be involved. What we're looking at doing in discussion around that is dividing it into well, thorough literature review and a systemic literature review, which is more of a summary read of related literature at a later stage because there is just such a volume of material here. But that's progressing as planned. Interesting development from a sovereign citizen point of view this week was that Desi Freeman got, so to speak. Police found him. There was a shootout, and now he's dead. So that we saw that as an opportunity because he's a major figure in the sovereign citizen movement. That was likely to bring out all of the people that were on his side or defending him or otherwise. So we used that as an opportunity to get out there and research the topic a little bit more, understand the nature of that movement a little bit more, as well as the membership of the keywords, and therefore make it easier to identify them. So that was distressing. Oh boy, was that distressing. Wow. This is going to be a challenge going forward. After a little while, my brain did just turn off a little bit, or the sensitivity to what was actually being posted just to switch off. So that's good. But going through all of the posts, so we started off with anyone who was supportive of Desi Freeman. For those who aren't familiar, Desi Freeman was the fellow sovereign citizen who, for want of a better word, ambushed two police officers that came to arrest him or question him about sexual abuse claims, and at his property, and he shot two of them, killed two of them, took a gun and took off into the bush. Very standard MO, or very, very much in line with the MO for sovereign citizens who commit violence. It wasn't a planned proactive attack so much as it was a planned defensive attack, which is to say he ambushed, waited for them to come to the property and was ready for them. That's happened at least a couple other times in Australia. No documented cases, at least in Australia, of them of sovereign citizens going out to attack proactively, like blowing up government properties or shooting people up or anything like that. It's always reactive, which is interesting. Very distinct difference. Anyway, so looking at the comments, oh boy. Now it's hard to tell how many of these are legitimate or not, or which bots or whatnot. What the motivation for running bots on this topic would be, I have no idea. But depending on the newspaper, the news report, we go to news reports about the death, neutral space, so to speak, and look at the comments. Look at any that were supportive of Desi Freeman, and there were a lot. Oh boy, was there a lot. The Herald Sun, in particular, I'd say was nearly 95% supportive. Now, when I say supportive, it could be anything from he's a modern day Ned Kelly, all the way through to the far more moderate, where's the police body camera footage? Why haven't we seen the police body camera footage from the initial shooting, etc., etc., casting doubt, but clearly not on the side of the police, clearly not on the side of the government, and therefore nominally supportive. A lot of dead men tell no tales as well. Overall, I'd say Harold Sun was definitely the exception. Overall, I'd say we're probably looking at about 30% supportive comments. Um, Not a lot of arguing, interestingly enough, a little bit here and there, but for the most part, I don't know if that's just something people don't bother with anymore, or maybe it's the way that the comments are structured on social media these days that it just keeps moving down. So engaging with one that's already passed is pointless. It's gone. So yeah, interesting. We are trying to find identifiers. That was harder than you might expect. Not as much pseudo law coming out in those comments as one might think. In the end, all I did was trawl through any positive comments on the guy and then see if they were posting sovereign citizen stuff in their private feeds in their publicly facing accounts. Uh, Honestly, the biggest giveaway was the red ensign. They all use the red ensign. It's really, really, really obvious. So that's interesting. You dig around on that, and they've got a lot of local networks after that. So, but regardless, after about 2 hours of that, you run out of steam. You just can't read. Honestly, like having done a little bit of reading into the motivations and knowing that financial stress is a common factor here, it's distressing to read just because it's like the amount of I'm projecting here, but the amount of suffering on display in these communities, it's clear that things are bad for many of them. Like a lot of them will post videos one after the other, and things are just getting worse and worse and worse. Case of the treatment. that they're using to try and solve their financial woes, making it worse in the long term, but they've already committed to it, so it's good money after bad, so to speak, and it just gets really grim. Very sad to watch. But anyway, and the nature of the prose is such that you can tell it's intensifying. Like it's quite from an outside first time read, from an objective point of view, it looks very crazy, like very delusional. We're making up screeds now. The worst ones post things that are like 3 pages long as a post, which is madness. No one reads those, but you know what I mean. So yeah, that's been an interesting experience. Beyond that, the literature review, yeah, there's been a few additional developments since then. We're still looking at ethical concepts around. So I've sort of switched focus a little bit. I'm trying to look into the ethical frameworks that we may or may not use in this case. Hate speech is a common one. Lots of legislation around that and a lot of developments, obviously, in Australia since Bondi here. In particular, the limitations that are placed around that. Nearly always, it focuses on a specific piece of language. It has to, right? Like in order to be operated on. But it's becoming more or less intrusive. But ultimately, it still comes down to the social media companies to either respond to reports or to proactively detect. So I think that is definitely more viable now, but it's still pretty patchy. That was pretty obvious when we went looking for the sovereign citizen stuff, to be honest. There was several references in there to like hanging traitors. And I mean, it's a clear call for violence, right? Not necessarily against an individual, maybe not an imminent call for violence, but it's the sort of thing you'd think that the automatic systems would pick up on these days. But as always, the problem's volume, I suspect. It's like that and rigorous enforcement and accountability and whatnot, but like primarily, technically, I imagine it's volume. It's just hard to stay on top of all this material. I don't know if people have faith in the reporting mechanisms either, so that might be a factor. Either way. Bill, still working around J.M. Berger's definition of extremism, which has been incredibly helpful. But going beyond that, looking at a couple other things this week, pulling up some notes. Yeah. Oh, yes. Interesting new theory. So, surrounding the concept of the age-old debate about freedom of speech and in a democratic stable country, where is the limit between security and freedom? Now, there always is one. Anyone who claims to be a free speech absolutist is either 14 or you know, or is talking bullshit, is on a grift because no one really believes in free speech absolutism and no one will continue to believe in after about 5 minutes of discussion about the topic because defamation like treason, sedition. All of these concepts are well-established boundaries on freedom of speech. Always have been, right? Like no one's going to argue the whole yelling fire in a movie theater thing. It's like imminent risk. If you, yeah. Anyway, but looking at the more strategic question, particularly in an online format, about all right, well, under what circumstances are we justified in regulating speech in terms of the political spectrum of a country, right? So specifically neo-Nazis, Islamic extremists, sovereign citizens to a degree. And I come across a new concept here, which is actually has its origins back in the 50s or the 60s, by the looks of it, called militant democracy. There's been a lot of debate about this in the social sciences area, as it turns out. Militant democracy is essentially the idea that in order to preserve itself, a democracy must be militant against threats to its nature or to its existence. This is obviously a effort to directly answer this concept, basically, of to deal with the paradox of tolerance. That there are groups within a democracy that will seek to end the democracy and replace it with a different form of government or to subvert it or whatever. Right? And therefore, to protect itself, the democracy must be militant. It must be willing to defend itself, even if that involves violation of its own principles normally. Now, this is not as crazy as it probably sounds because, I mean, that's just law, right? It's like we don't endorse violence in our communities. We don't endorse violence as a means of solving problems inside our society, but we do endorse the police existing, whose whole thing is the use of violence in order to maintain that rule of law. This is absolutely necessary, right? We don't endorse theft. We do endorse taxes. involuntary giving to the government, which, as I've written before, and I'll maybe link to that. I'm still pretty happy with that one. Taxation as theft is something that the libertarians had like to bring out from time to time. And the thing is like on paper, yeah, from a legalistic point of view, yeah, you've probably got a point. It's involuntary taking of money from a person to a contract they never agreed to, sovereign citizens again. But so, I mean, from a strictly legalistic perspective, yeah, you might have a point there. Who cares? Reality doesn't run on law, doesn't run on values or rules. It runs on consequences. And from a consequentialist point of view, this works. Commit the taxes, purchase society, or purchase civilization. Every other alternative we've tried to it has worked very badly over a few hundred people at any rate. So, yeah, from a legalistic perspective, you could make a point there that using force or suppressing political dissent in order to maintain a democracy violates the concept of democracy, except in practice, that's silly. I mean, to allow an authoritarian state to arise because we were too principled is ludicrous from a consequential point of view. So that's going to serve as a useful. There's been obviously a lot of debate around that idea about where the limitations are. There's some interesting commentary here from a fellow named Kirshner, who wanted to include the idea of participation, maximizing participation in a militant democracy, which someone very interestingly has counteracted by saying this is akin to saying that we want you to participate in democracy, provided that you play by our rules and also that you let us win. So yeah, interesting point. Kind of invalidates that argument. But there's other conditions in here that make more sense, like the idea of only intervening in exceptional circumstances, which goes back to my very high bar or high threshold for using for this ethical framework upon which we then intervene. And the idea that we should openly acknowledge the costs of intervention. So if we do need to use the power of the state to protect the state against political dissent, in this case, where it can be justified, Nazism, etc., then we should be transparent about when we're using it and why. It's very easy not to do that. The government traditionally is a little allergic to transparency. But I think, as I've argued in a previous video about here, I think that might be beneficial, actually proactively better for everyone if we do, not just from an accountability point of view, but it also establishes an ethical, again, going back to that thing, if we've set an ethical framework up here, a bar up here that says this is very, very lofty, and if your conduct or if your movement as a whole, Nazis, goes beyond this, you're done. We're going to throw the bots at you and get you off. You're done. Sorry. That also, by coincidence, means that everything, which again, if with the ethical framework in place, should be reasonably easy to justify, shouldn't it? I mean, that's the whole point of the ethical framework. Like from a transparency point of view, some people might object, but if we do a good job with the ethical framework and the consequences that there's no Nazis on Facebook anymore is a pretty big win. However, that also means that anything below that bar, by those same standards, you will not use AI to push you off, meaning that's an accountability framework, right? Being transparent about this is beneficial for everyone. Builds confidence in the tool or the use of the tool by the government or by these companies in terms of policy. It isn't going to be legislated, so there's no guarantees, but there was never any guarantees to start with, was it? As an aside, that's an interesting point. I've run into a little bit of critical feedback, for want of a better word, about the use of AI in this case, in this space, and I don't disagree. A few people have raised concerns about the ethical and whether this can be done ethically, and whether we're enabling government intervention here. This comes down to a very important point, all right? Something that has been on my mind and part of the reason I wanted to do this PhD in the first place. The idea of a slippery slope here, whereby, yeah, don't get me wrong, like accidentally stepping on legitimate political speech here is massively central to my thinking, and it will never be tolerated. But the idea that a government could come in and use what I'm building to rationalize or justify limiting political speech, legitimate political speech, like what's happening up in Sydney at the moment with the T-shirts and other slogans, it's not actually a problem. For the very simple reason that if an authoritarian government wants to come in and suppress legitimate political speech, like that's their intent, that's not an accident that they stumbled into because we didn't do a good job with the standards. If that's their intention, they don't need me to rationalize it. There has never once been an authoritarian government that's gone, oh, the academics don't agree with us, therefore we're going to not do it. No, the government just does it. I mean, look at the US right now. Look at Minns up in New South Wales doing the same thing. It's not like anyone is sitting there. There's no need to rationalize the suppression of speech. As the government, if you have enough power or enough authority and you reckon you can get away with it with the electorate, you just do it. Is it a violation of the Constitution? Who gives a shit if you've floated the court, as in the US? But if over in Australia, you can just draw it into a protracted legal battle. And even then, if they rescind it as law, you can institute it as policy. This is the thing. This is the thing I keep coming back to over and over again from a political point of view. If there's one thing I need to convey to everyone about politics and governance, as we're getting a vivid example of from the US right now, there is nothing more dangerous than a government that doesn't want to get re-elected, or that doesn't care about being re-elected, or that is confident that it will be re-elected no matter what. Because as it turns out, every single accountability mechanism we have for the government is either voluntary, self-policed, voluntary, or is hinges on the idea that they want to be re-elected. So if they don't, or if they don't think they need to be, there's nothing to stop them. They're nothing. Yeah. Seriously, put it like this. If you got a government in next year, or into whatever jurisdiction you're in, and decided that it wanted to build a sewage treatment plant inside your house, ludicrous, insane, unethical, blatantly illegal. But we're talking about the government. If they were driven enough to do that, they can do it. Eminent domain, they can seize your house, they can seize part of your house, they can pay you, they can ruin the value of your land before they do that, and then they don't have to pay you nothing. Or they can just not pay you. You can legally challenge that. Good luck in the High Court on your single income or dual income, whatever. You get the point, right? If the government wants to ruin you, they can. The fact of the matter is they don't need permission to do so. Now, the reason they don't do that is because one, there's nothing in it for them, and two, it'll look terrible in the media, wouldn't it? Which affects their running chances next time round. All cost, no benefit. Yeah. But if they're fully driven and they don't care about getting re-elected, it's nothing to stop them. Now, I know that sounds extreme, but it sounded a lot more extreme before the US went ahead and gave us a live example of exactly that happening. So, anyway, a tangent. The government can easily restrict legitimate political speech anytime it wants if it decided to do so. My job really, when it comes to this PhD, is not preventing that because no one can prevent that without like substantial reforms to the accountability systems inside Parliament, which is something I have a lot of thoughts about, and I've done a lot of work on my whole master's thesis. But my job is to make sure that it doesn't happen accidentally or stupidly because someone read the framework from a legalistic point of view instead of applying some judgment. Again, monitoring and evaluation will be central to that. Accountability will be central to that, and transparency will be central to that accountability. Transparency and accountability are not the same thing, incidentally. Transparency is an enabling factor of accountability, but it is not accountability in its own right. Anyway, by the by. So that's a huge factor. Beyond that, I got a lot more reading to do on ethics. Commencement is the next big hurdle. That's not for a while yet. That's going to be probably about July or August. It's meant to be 9 months after you start. And I started technically at the start of December, so that would put us in August. Um, I mean, no one does any work in academia over December and January anyway, so it was a weird time to start, but whatever. So that's that. Yeah, yeah, going all right, going all right. God, it's got so much reading to do, and it takes a bloody long. Gonna have to get good at speed reading, but there's this whole balance between comprehension and speed. I mean, I can speed read it, or I could just read the abstract. No one does that. No, no one does that in academia. No, 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 no. But the thing is, it's like by doing that, I lower my comprehension of the material. So what was the point? This is the difference between a systemic literature review and a normal literature, like a proper thorough literature review. What we're focusing on right now is the thorough. I need to understand what the key concepts are. Militant democracy being a perfect example of that. I didn't know that existed. Why would I have known that existed? Once I have those key terms, for example, I can then do a systemic literature review, which would be much more along the lines of what are the broad themes of discussion? Well, what's the broad academic consensus and the broad criticisms of militant democracy as a standard? That I don't need to read the whole study, but in order to know what militant democracy is, I do. So yeah, we're working through it at the moment. I'm trying not to panic. I keep coming I keep coming back to the book, though it wasn't just the book, it was pretty much everything. Everything I've ever done has I've gone through the same process, which is hilarious of like, oh my God, I'm going to screw this up. Oh God, I'm so behind. Oh my God, oh my God. And then it just gets done. Every fucking time. Excuse the language. Every single time. It just gets done. Yeah, persistence. Just working on it. And plus a bit of panic in the latter end of things, of course. But it'll get done. Yeah, I hope. I got 3 years. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and I do work better at sprint. But well, I think I do anyway. Rarely done much more projects much longer than 3 years. So anyway, so far so good. Week 10. Try not to panic. We'll continue onwards. The one thing I can say with absolute certainty is I'm learning a lot. Oh boy, it's exactly the same feeling. Certain people will know exactly what this experience feels like and or looks like on me. I was learning Farsi at one point there. I did 150 classes, and literally, I can't like I tell no lie. It felt like my brain was swelling, like this, like literally, it felt like my brain had expanded in size, and not in a good way. I mean, like inflamed. It was awful. And after every class, I come back and someone would be asked, "What did you learn today?" And I legitimately could not tell you. I was like, I don't recall, which is like just decompressing. I think I just overloaded for the day. Or maybe I just suck at languages, who knows? But I'm not good at languages. I will say that. I put a lot of effort into it, but I'm not good at it. Different type of learning, I think. But it's exactly, how people talk about like do something different to what you used to in order to stave off dementia. I think that's what they mean. Like that was so far out of my scope that I could literally feel my brain physically changing, and did not care for it. But much like working a muscle for the first time that hasn't been worked for a long time, another experience I've had relatively recently. Yeah, yeah, you could tell it was doing stuff it needed to do. So something to think of. Anyway, here we are. Enough rambling from me. I am, in fact, procrastinating. So back to the grind.